seems like it's time to start, so let's get this party rolling. My name is Tom Kenyon. I am the creative director at Blue Tent, and I am joined here with Maria Beam, who is our designer, UX, and front-end developer. And we're here to talk about design for Drupal, think like an agency. Can I get a show of hands on, I don't know, first of all, I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to be at a conference called Design for Drupal, which is, I think, fair to say night and day if you go back a few years in the Drupal ecosystem. So it's a phenomenal event to have. So we're excited. We're from the mountains of Colorado. So we came out here and kind of took that energy from DrupalCon in Austin. We do a lot of Drupal development and really wanted to participate in the design community as it relates to Drupal. So here we are in Boston and very excited to be here. But I wanted to find out from the audience, how many people in the audience are designers? And how would you describe your roots? Are you, how many designers in the audience come from kind of a web shop roots? And how many come from, say, maybe a boutique design shop or an agency or something along those lines? And so, and that's an important distinction. A lot of times, here we are talking about really trying to elevate our design in the Drupal platform. And, you'll find yourself in that discussion from one of two paths, typically. I've heard people talk about it from, four paths. But really, at the end of the day, you're coming into this world from the standpoint of maybe you're a web shop who's always been a resource that was contracted out by an ad agency who got involved in Drupal and needed a Drupal shop to execute for them. And then there's also the other aspect of, you're an ad agency and you've always, I'm sorry, the opposite, where you're a Drupal shop and you just get handed the assets. You get handed a beautiful PSD deck, you get handed, designs, and you might even be allowed to be client-facing. And so you have very different perspectives of how you got to this point, but really I think there's been, especially for the small to medium shops, kind of a merger, so to speak, where you can call it kind of a grass is greener type of approach, but you have a lot of web shops looking at the agency side saying, well, why couldn't we do the design? Why couldn't we engage the client? Why couldn't we go through the ideation phase? Why couldn't we, establish what the overall scope of the project is? And then you have ad agencies doing very similar things, saying, wow, we just kicked, $50,000 to $200,000 or even beyond to a web shop, and all we need to do is pick up a few developers and take on that role as well. So you have kind of a merger into this kind of digital agency concept, and I thought it'd be a good time to kind of put together a session on, in particular for web shops, on how to think like an agency as it relates to design, how you can get design processes and workflows in your business so that you can perform those duties successfully and really apply, great Drupal experiences through design. So I hope that, at the end of this session, you'll kind of get a sense of what agencies do to embody design, how they sell it, how they promote it, how they implement it, and how the design process can really work with your development teams and work on the Drupal platform. I'm going to cover, initially, before I dive into Drupal-specific discussions, I really wanted to cover how an agency looks at design. Obviously, from an agency's perspective, design is everything. It's the embodiment of everything that they do. Everything from how they value it, how they invest in it, how they promote it, and how they use it as a tool to engage their clients. It's very different than how a web shop uses their skills and expertise in web and technology. And really, this kind of embodies the fact that as a web shop evolves to take on these kind of services and really start to think like an agency, it's good business. It's good business to think like an agency. It's good business to do good design. And this is a quote from the obviously there's the credit, but one of the tools I love to use is InVision. And does anyone in this audience use InVision for collaboration or prototyping? It's a phenomenal tool, and Google it after the session. You'll love it and probably get hooked. But they have a lot of great quotes that they send you either through email marketing or packaging or something along those lines, and I am definitely using them. I love design quotes. So step one, you want to design. You're probably in here looking at how can I, from either a business perspective or from a designer perspective, how can I be a better designer and make my Drupal sites better than where they are right now. But really, looking at the big picture, you've got to start from the beginning, and you've got to start from the top down. And the reason that is you really have to make sure that you have complete company buy-in to good design, even if it's related to Drupal platform, custom, WordPress, whatever the case may be. And that starts with your brand. Agencies put a lot of effort into their brand because it is the embodiment of who they are. Their brand says we are capable of doing a high level of design on a Drupal platform. It's one of those things where you need to have a brand that supports your sales strategy, that gives you the support you need to sell design, that gives you all the infrastructure and direction you need to really take design to the Drupal platform. But more than anything, when you go through a branding process, if you're a web shop who doesn't have a real strong brand, and that's, as you go through a bunch of web shop websites, you can see how a lot of them don't really communicate to me that they're capable of doing a high level of design. So you got to start there. You've got to start with the idea that your brand is going to be the kickoff to great design on Drupal. It might sound abstract, but it gets your ownership to buy into it. You have a whole branding process. You go into positioning statements and tagline development. You go into all the materials and the processes that are required to build a brand. You start to get a large buy-in company-wide. And so, I wasn't even looking behind me. But yeah, so that's really the biggest deal there is I work for a shop right now, Blue Tent, where we're a Drupal roots company. This is a good way to put it, a web shop. And we're making that evolution to a digital agency. And step one to doing better design work was just that, to get the owners to believe that this is worth investing in, this is worth building the brand around. So we had to make sure our brand was in line with design services. We had to make sure that it was a part of our story. So when people ask me what kind of company I work for, I say a digital agency. I don't say a Drupal shop. It's a very different thing. And then finally, your entire team, when you have a strong brand, your entire team can recite your brand. Your entire team can understand the brand of the company they work for. That includes the designers, of course, but that includes project managers. That includes developers, lead developers, CTOs, COOs. Everybody who's going to influence your abilities to do good design on Drupal are going to understand the brand of the company that they work with. And that is probably the biggest component of delivering good design on the Drupal platform as it relates to thinking like an agency. The next thing from once you've put a value in it and you've branded yourself in the design realm, so to speak, you have to invest in it. And so, again, this commitment to investing in good design goes beyond, I'm not going to come in here and say, here's how you build PSDs and apply them to Drupal type of scenario. It's really, I wanted to kind of cover some of these basics of, once you value design, you have to invest in it. It might sound kind of silly, but once you have a company who values design, they're going to have to get the right people. They're going to have to get the right tools. They're going to have to establish the right processes. These are all very expensive endeavors. And it's a significant buy-in, but all those things, again, you're setting the foundation to do good design in Drupal. Drupal is not easy to do design in. It's not easy to do responsive web work in. It's not easy to do a lot of things in. But the tool itself dictates, a major investment. And it's an investment to do that even for static custom sites or something along those lines.
Design's not an add-on service. It has to be something that your brand champions from the very start, and it will inspire your entire team, really, from the very beginning.
Absolutely. So It's an expensive endeavor, and it takes time. One of the things that I've found through coming from the agency background and coming onto a web shop where we've begun this evolution is the time. Expense is one of those things that you can say, okay, we've invested in it, we can put some money behind it, but our workflows don't allow for that kind of time. Our workflows are really built towards, sprint models on the development side, feature-driven development, or they're built around, this whole concept of closing a deal and getting knee-deep in, outlining features and content types and so forth. And now you have to look at it as, now we're selling something far bigger to our clients than just simply a website. And the design aspect takes significant time. So you need to have those workflows in place. You need to have those processes clearly outlined so that, project managers, developers, and the entire team knows the time that they're about to embark on. And, another component of this is you've got to obviously fund great design. Just like the sales team will go out and talk about, a certain number of features costing, a certain amount, spreadsheets, Excel files, and so forth. You have to obviously promote your brand and promote your design services. And the goal is, of course, to fund it so that when the projects come in, instead of selling a project that might have been $100,000, now you're selling $200,000 projects or $150,000 projects because you have to fund the design process. And in order to do that, you're going to have to sell like an agency. You cannot sell like a web shop to fund design. And really, it's not even fair to say that about a web shop. You can't sell web, in the sense that you're trying to sell user stories in the website, right? You're trying to sell a deeper connection with the client in regards to, we're not going to build you a website. We're going to build you, a content marketing platform, or we're going to build you conversion funnels, or we're going to build you, these brand experiences. And so the same thing applies with design. When you take on the role of really thinking like an agency and selling design in your web shop, you've got to think about the aspect of you're selling brand, you're not selling design. You can't add on, just like in the earlier session, you can't add on a chunk of money to say this is a responsive design add-on. Same way you can't just add on a chunk of design services. You're selling a brand experience, and you're going to have to go down that process with the clients, very similar to how we do development on Drupal now. You're selling solutions. You're selling, when the client talks to you about how a market might perceive them and how they wanted the market to perceive them, or how they want to be perceived in 5 years, or how they want to inspire a user. And so you're solving solutions and selling those solutions, not simply outlining, how many reiterations of a PSD or a style tile you might be producing. And then finally, obviously, the strategy. You obviously want to sell that and not just start focusing on features of this nature or that nature. You want to really make sure you keep the conversation at an agency level where you're really talking about how design is going to solve their brand strategy problems. It's going to solve some bigger marketing objectives. And that's going to get you the funds you need to facilitate high-quality design in Drupal. And finally, this is really kind of dovetails into sales. This is how you engage clients from that initial contact of sale to the point to where you are getting close to pen on paper, or you've already passed that point of pen on paper. The thinking like an agency must continue as it relates to design. You have to set the stage for your expertise, your authority in the technical and design spaces. You have to start really building that type of trust with the client. And so I call this kind of phase engagement. Like I said, it can be sometimes before or after the actual pen on paper, but it's really come past that initial salesperson who's brought in the fish, so to speak, and it's really a client who's now been introduced to a larger team. They're talking to your developers about pain points. They're talking to, introducing themselves to project managers and all that type of stuff. So why do we do this? Design in itself needs deeper questions to succeed. You don't want to kick off a relationship with a client where you're not asking the right questions that are going to facilitate the designer to be able to build compelling experiences. So, this is kind of just an abstraction, but, when you're asking questions from the agency perspective, you're asking, what do you want your users to experience, or something along those lines, whereas a web shop, we usually get kind of a sense of tunnel vision, where we're looking at, well, what kind of features do you want? What do you want in, how would you prioritize your features? Do you like slideshows? Do you want full browser width? All these type of things. We focus on elements that don't really give designers compelling feedback, meaning if you start outlining features, you're going to just get designs that look like the designs from before. They look like designs that are applied to a theme, because you've been focusing on features and less on bigger picture business issues. And this is probably I really like this slide, because web shops are getting really good at starting to take control, meaning they've gone through the phase of kind of just being the only arms in the room that can actually do the job, so to speak. And they've just been either controlled by either an agency or a client to simply implement technical solutions. And now they're really coming to their own as, web shops. We're coming into these relationships as technical experts, Drupal experts. We know how to boost your conversions. We know how to solve your business problems. And it's necessary for us, obviously, with responsive web design and so forth, to make sure that we don't outline a series of, we've all probably done this mistake. You outline 50, 60 features, and all of a sudden you're held to that Bible until the project ends, which usually means you're 200% over budget or something crazy. So we're starting to understand how we come into a relationship from a technical standpoint as experts, how that protects us, but also lets the client understand that we're going to solve their bigger problems and not outline features. And the same thing applies to design. You have to remember that if you're going to take in design to try and really elevate your Drupal projects from a design perspective, you have to be able to be an expert in design too. That means you're not asking questions like, what are your favorite colors, or what sites do you like? You're coming in to the conversation as an expert in that field and identifying with their brand, understanding their strategy around their brand, understanding what they're trying to communicate, how they're trying to drive that emotional connection with their users. So the same thing applies from where we're moving in the technology world. You got to remember from the design perspective as well. And just some, an example of that type of scenario is, this kind of initial engagement of, we need a website. Well, the way I always put it to our team is, we don't build websites. That just is one of the tools. It's a platform. It's a central core to a lot of marketing efforts or conversions, but it's not, you didn't buy a website from us, because then you're going to find yourself getting stuck into that kind of feature list development style. And the same thing applies here. You want to take control. You want to basically start understanding some bigger questions from the client. USP, for those who don't know, is your unique sales proposition. So you're really trying to dive in and make a connection with a client by asking bigger questions. Those questions excite them. Those questions make them go, wow, they want to know about my business. I didn't just contract them for a website. They want to learn more. They really want to dive deep. And you're making a connection just as much with the client as you will with the end user. And this process is paramount, because I think it's probably safe to say that if your client does not trust you as a technical expert or trust you as a design expert, it's not a good fit. And that kind of related to the earlier session that I was listening to about sales and so forth. If a client doesn't trust your abilities to take their budget dedicated to digital marketing, or take their budget dedicated to some capital investments and solve their business problems, whether it's design or technical, you're not in a relationship that's going to be one that can thrive. And so this is one of those things that design is your secret weapon. Building a client's trust in technology is a little bit more difficult, because you have to essentially prove it through time. But if you build it with the right questions initially, with design-oriented questions around their brand strategy, around this company that they love and that they've been passionately behind for many years, you start to develop trust that's going to last the entire project through. It's going to be through the closing of the deal, perhaps. It's going to be going through the design iterations, and they're not going to be questioning your color choices because there's a trust that you're delivering the solutions, and that's going to go right into development. So once you kick off your development sprints, they're going to have that same type of trust that they're working with experts. And then process. Now we're kind of getting into the design process. We're kind of, through the branding and the investment and promotion of design. But now we're talking about the design process. And this is not for web process. This is for design. And the reason I bring this up is when we initially proposed this session, you get the sense that everyone wants a solution for is there a magic formula for designing websites? There's not really a magic formula for designing websites that I'm aware of, at least not one that's going to work for anyone in this room except for our shop. But one thing that I can share is from the agency side, what are processes that create high quality design? And these are processes that in general I see not followed in web shops consistently. They're broken almost immediately, and then we always wonder why our websites didn't turn out the way we had hoped they would have. So the design process itself is, I kind of call it a design flow. And this is where once you've invested in design, you have a process and you have people who can deliver a good quality design process. And that means you have the ability for someone to take the client's brand strategy, like an art director, and they're able to communicate that to the lead designer or designer on the project. You have the ability to really frame the deliverable and the scope of ideation and creation phases. So if that phase at that time is sketches with Sharpies or pencils, if that phase is taking crude prototypes into InDesign, Illustrator, or whatever tool you like, and then you go through a collaborative phase where the art director gets back involved once you've done a kind of this initial ideation phase, where you're able to review and collaborate and identify where you might have strayed, identify where basically just continue on with the art direction process. And the reason we do that immediate review in the agency world, if you will, is you don't want your designer going off into a room and doing a big grand finale, just like you don't want your developer doing the same thing. That kills budgets, as we all know, and there's always a miscommunication. There's always, there's so many people, and it's been talked about in a few sessions prior today as well. You have, the salespeople, you have the project managers, you have developers, you have so many people, and of course the client. You have so many people involved who know something about this user experience you're trying to build, and they need to see those sketches before it moves on. And then the process goes through, design, and then it goes through a final approval, and then, of course, you can actually, then finally present it to the client. So that's kind of the design flow. And then we have roles. This is not an exhaustive list of roles, as you know. I mean, you can search job titles that I constantly see job titles that I didn't know existed, especially in the web world. But what's important about this is agencies rely on process and roles and not people. We can't, if you have a rock star designer / front-end developer / unicorn, like I do, you can't rely on that person to it's kind of like a myth. They're producing great work for you, and it's not because of your processes or the roles you've put into place. It's not repeatable. They get sick, they get hired away, whatever the case may be, you're kind of back to square one, and you're going to try to put out a job opening for some really absurd job position. So you have to establish these roles. And these roles are very important for consistency as well. So you need to, if you're going to design and really start thinking like an agency, you need to have people who are consistently taking the handoff from the client and communicating the brand strategy, like art directors or creative directors. You need to have lead designers overseeing, the design group as a whole. You need to have, people who are dedicated to UX design. You need to have people who are dedicated to front-end development. Even if you have somebody doing multiple roles, like Maria or myself, it's important to identify those different roles that person wears, because that process is what you're trying to refine. And so when you have someone who's getting too high of a burn rate, for instance, you can replace a specific part of what they do and not just simply say, do everything that person's doing and just help them out. And that's not going to be a sustainable process. So agencies rely on roles to help create quality that's sustainable. And then rules. We're obviously here for design for Drupal. And the perception is generally then that, we have this kind of designer versus developer thing that I hope dies sometime this year. But, designers love rules. That's one thing people forget. And Drupal is this kind of key to the kingdom of rules. Drupal's designers want to know the context of what they do. If you're developing a logo, you want to know that it can be shrunk and blown up and scanned and embroidered and put on a vehicle. They want to know a sign that's put on a wall, how far away that person's going to be, what materials it has, is it moving, how fast can it move. They want to know the papers, the inks. Designers have forever had to deal with rules, and that's the exciting part of design. Without rules, it's fine art. Without rules, rules are what generate revenue that either facilitate advertising or facilitate commerce or whatever the case may be. So that is the core of what designers want, and developers hold the knowledge of some of those rules, quite a bit of the rules that relates to web development on Drupal. And so that is really the core of what we wanted to talk about as well. Is we have this great design process that you can implement from an agency perspective, but it's important to always know that designers love the rules of the ecosystem and those limitations. And so another quote from InVision, since I'm just going to abuse their packaging, not from InVision, but the quotes that they had sent me. I love this quote. The designers are going to be constantly focusing on design for people, the communication to people, really empathizing with the users. And the developers know those rules, but obviously we want to make sure that the end result is built for people. So when you find yourself either not communicating with the developer and you start producing a product that looks, like you basically styled some sort of CMS or something along those lines, you end up with a design that doesn't communicate. This is kind of a wrap-up, if you will, of the process. So what are we trying to accomplish with design flow? What we're trying to accomplish with establishing some roles, and what we're trying to accomplish with understanding the rules is we're really trying to create a system from a business standpoint that, obviously creative collaboration is huge. And I mean creative collaboration, whether you're talking with a developer, whether the designer's talking with a project manager or the client. Collaboration, I think it's safe to say, has any designer out here been in a big group or by themselves all, in their career? You can tell that when you're all alone, the world starts to get small, you find yourself no longer growing, you're able to maybe still do good work, but you've kind of put on the brakes a little bit. And as soon as you start introducing interaction with people and collaboration, you really start to exponentially increase your abilities. We want to make sure that we, with this process, align with the medium in Drupal. Again, so with the involvement of developers throughout this whole process, establishing those rules, not pretending those rules don't apply to designers, we really can start to align to the final context of our design. We want to foster creative thinking, going from sketches to direction, to design, to review, to presentation. These are all designed to foster successful design. And then, obviously, throughout the whole process with the collaboration, you have oversight on goals and objectives to make sure that they're always aligned and always being met. But really, at the end of the day, we're trying to create consistent quality for your brand and your clients. And that's probably the biggest thing that people forget is every website you build and design reflects your brand. And that kind of brings everything full circle, but you obviously want your client's brand to shine. But we all know how that reflects on ours. Process gone wrong. So what are signs that the process has gone wrong? And this is kind of, you probably can all relate to a lot of these type of things. Mobile sites, if you don't have a really, creative ideation phase to a mobile site, you're going to end up with a site, back in the day of mobile sites where they're all bars and someone's site was blue bars and someone's site was red bars and yellow bars. Every site looked the same because we were just theming tools. We weren't designing from scratch, So design that looks like the tool. I can't tell you how many times I've seen logos that are started out in Illustrator. And I can tell you what happens when someone jumps right into Adobe Illustrator to develop a logo. It's going to be an oval or a square, and it's going to look exactly like Illustrator built the logo. And then websites, I think, while we're here, websites that look like the CMS. That's probably the core reason why we're here, why we want to elevate our game on designing for Drupal. And those processes that I've outlined, how agencies think from everything from their brand, that it's all intended to break this pattern of the client shouldn't see it as a CMS. The end user shouldn't see it as a CMS. It shouldn't look like you just did some theming. And you're not going to be able to break that through just sheer will. You're not going to be able to break that cycle through just sheer talent. You have to have processes and people in place that really help create truly authentic design that truly meets the client's goals and brand strategy. Because every client's brands, their strategies are not all around, deploying me a beautifully functioning Drupal website, and it's clear it's a Drupal website, and won't really differentiate them. So that's, so let's start talking about, now that we have a sense of agency thought process around design, let's start talking about this relationship from designer and developer. And Maria has some insight, because she's knee-deep in the battle every day as a designer and a UX designer, and then move into the front-end development side. Quite a lot of perspective that would be great to share with you.
Yeah. So as Tom was kind of saying, collaboration and open communication throughout the design and development process is essential to necessitate success in your project. I think I might have skipped a slide. So we do use InVision app as one of our collaboration tools. And we'll get a little bit deeper into this when we get into kind of the prototyping phase. But regardless of whatever tools you use, you need to make sure that you have some process in place to facilitate communication between your designer and your developer throughout the entire process. So this is just an example of one of the ones that we use. This is InVision app.
All right, this is a screenshot of InVision app, and like I said, I'm using their quotes from their packaging, so I should definitely pimp them wherever possible. It's a tool that allows me to do a lot of art direction with my team. We have a remote team like many web shops do. A lot of them are located in our office, but many are remote. And even for the ones in the office, this gives me a chance to put up sketches for review, clients including that review. It allows me to put up PSDs, layers. It allows me to put up interactions. So I have up here, I have a wireframe for a project. I have a PSD. I have some nice good old Greek interactions for a mobile concept. This is a very, very late stage responsive website. So I have everything up there, teams that are invited to it. Everyone comes in, we make comments, we doodle on it, we talk about, the search team will come in and say, please make sure you wrap this in an H3. And the devs will say, are you crazy? This is insane type of stuff. So we have all that type of thing, that communication string in here. And so it's absolutely paramount from the design process. It's no longer a, chuck it over the fence and hope it works mentality. Everyone's working together throughout the entire process.
Yeah, and the project teams are big and robust. You'll have a PM, you'll have search, you'll have SEO, but the relationship between the designer and the developer, we just can't emphasize enough. How many of you in here are married? Raise your hand, Tom.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I want you to think of every project that you take on as a marriage in which you and your developer are partners. I got married recently back in February, and I'm learning that there are a lot of things that it takes to make a healthy relationship and make it work, right? So being willing to make compromises for the good of the project, for the good of the marriage. You both need to be willing to bend a little bit, especially, are there any developers in here? All right, a lot of developers. So your designers are going to ask you for some crazy things sometimes. It's because we get excited. Do your best to listen to us and just be patient, because another part of it is just open communication and mutual respect between the two roles. We are done with the days of taking a deliverable and tossing it over a fence and saying, here you go, I did my part, see what you can do with it, pretty it up. And then we get in, we try and make it work, and then we say, I think I need an adjustment here, let me just chuck this back over the fence to you. And it goes back and forth, and it burns a lot of time, it burns a lot of budget, and it leads ultimately to frustration and just spending energy where it doesn't need to be spent. So, it's also a matter of being committed just to the communication between the project and also the success of the project, and to be kind and patient with each other. But we also know that sometimes, even if you manage to do these things, to compromise, to commit, to communicate, to be hell-bent on a successful project output, sometimes it doesn't work. And largely the reason why is because you have bypassed the phase where you're making sure that you are on the same page, making sure that you both have the same expectations and values going into the project. So when does this happen? When do you set out these guidelines and these ideas? It's during the ideation and wireframing process. So this is the phase in the project where your designer, you're honing in on your information architecture, you're honing in on your content strategy. You're thinking about how your users are interacting with content, how they can access and navigate the information that you're presenting with them, and that throughout this entire process, through the interactions, through the presentation of the content, that all of the interactions are in line with your client's brand and with either the goals of the business or the purpose of the project. Designers are using this period to think outside the box. We're thinking outside of the computer and outside of Drupal to assess our clients' business goals and look at our users as human beings and leverage our knowledge of how human beings think and how we process information and respond. And ultimately, users are going to respond most strongly to emotion and to immersive experiences. Now, at the same time, your developer is going through their own ideation process. During the wireframing developer ideation process, you guys are kind of going through your site building strategy. You're thinking about what tools and plugins and modules you may need in order to accomplish what your designer wants to see happen with their content strategy. Developers should be identifying problems that may need custom solutions down the road. It's also a great time where you can start to identify possible development challenges with Drupal when you actually get into the CMS. So at this point, developers are thinking inside the box. They're leveraging their knowledge and experience with Drupal and custom development solutions. Now, it is paramount that designers and developers are maintaining an open dialogue continuously through this phase. It's great for designers because developers just have a great knowledge of the inner workings of Drupal and can often demystify, which to me can appear to be things that happen by way of magic, right? So they can break those things down for us and really open up our creative space and options so that we can see other ways to do things. And as designers, you also have the power to inspire your developer. Developers are incredibly creative too, but they operate in a different space, and we can allow them and help push them to tap into that a little bit more. So a lot of web shops tend to skip the wireframing and ideation phase. And this is ultimately where web shops will fail and agencies are going to succeed because they just recognize the inherent value of making sure that your designer and your developer are on the same page and hold the same expectations for the project from the very start. so that you're not, again, tossing that deliverable over the fence. Here's my UX strategy. See how you can make features fit into this. It's going to wreak havoc.
In this phase is overlooked because if you come from a background of a web shop, it's not. I mean, you might find people doing, some UX doodles on, little iPhone pictures or something on those lines. But this process is probably one of the most timeless processes from design. I had a professor in college that required me to have an inch-thick stack of papers of Sharpie for logo drawings before I could move on. You had this computer right in front of you, that you were just dying to get into, but she forced you to come up with an inch stack of paper. And it was because it allowed the designer, your creative, to basically, it's kind of like a mind dump. It allows you to have very few barriers between your creative thought process, where you can take it in on one side, all the brand strategy and the goals and the objectives of the project, and you're able to very fluidly put out bad ideas, good ideas, anything that comes to your mind as quickly as possible. And the other place where shops fail is they don't include developers in this process. And I know it sounds crazy, but this is exactly the phase where Drupal starts and the designers start. It starts at the very beginning. They need to see these sketches just like the client does, just like the designer does. We need to see exactly what's happening early on. And if you skip this phase, it becomes readily apparent very quickly.
And we get to talk about the assets that we're both bringing to the table from opposite ends of the table. And we know how difficult that it can be to push forward with new technologies, the testing and the bugs and the prototyping. But this is a great phase for designers and developers to really sit down and talk about their big hopes for the project, their dreams for it. And then to really brew it down to a practical solution that's going to make both of you happy in the end. So once you kind of nail down your direction, you got your wireframes, and you move through the ideation process, you move into prototyping. So the prototyping phase is where your designers and developers are really exploring the challenges of taking ideation and bringing it into reality. Whether you're using low fidelity or high fidelity prototypes, it brings massive value to opening up the communication again to your entire team. So during this phase, the designer is largely going to be in the environment where they're nailing down and really polishing the interactions on the website. It's your opportunity to really create rules and guidelines for your content. I think we've all been in positions where we haven't done enough content modeling to foresee the type of robust content that's going to come down the line, and we lose control of it. We also have been in situations where we are receiving subpar content from our clients that are damaging the integrity of the website and giving us an unfinished result. So this is your opportunity to start putting guidelines and rules on those. You can reject subpar content. You can ask for a certain amount of content before you begin your website, but to really suss out and vet all of the different types of views, of iterations that this content may take, so that further down the road you have full control over how it's going to display and be served up to your user. Prototyping is also a great phase for you to start introducing interactions and animations to it. It really helps bring life into your prototypes. It gets your clients excited. They feel like they're able to touch something and interact with what they're paying for. They can look at it, at the brands and at the brand colors and the textures and the typography, and see that you've nailed who they are. I also recommend that when you're doing prototyping as a designer that you find some sort of platform like we use with InVision app. You've probably heard of Axure as well. Both are going to allow you to put annotations in your prototypes. So a lot of times what happens is you go through this great ideation and conceptualization and exploration phase, and you know what you want. And then you get into prototyping and you kind of get lost in the details in the build and why you actually made these decisions. Put it all into your annotations. If you explain why you've made a decision, you're a lot less likely to get direct pushback from your developer, which happens a lot during this phase. Developers are incredibly logical and rational, and if you explain why, a lot of times they'll come back to you with a creative solution instead of just saying, sorry, this isn't going to work. This is also the period of time when developers are going to start working on their feature infrastructure. They're thinking about how. How are they going to apply your interactions to their features? how can they take this static code that you've provided them with and turn them into a dynamic module? They're really looking at, on a micro level, how to make it happen. They're identifying challenges and possible roadblocks down the road. And it's really, again, this opening up and bringing designers and developers closer to each other and maintaining that conversation. Because sometimes what we think is a good idea in the wireframing phase doesn't always translate into prototyping. You have to be able to tell your developer when you're clicking through interactions like, hey, I'm sorry that I asked you to build this really cool interaction, but it's disruptive. And if you're a developer, this is when you turn your designer and say, I told you I would give you that sticky navigation with parallax sidebars and tours and tooltips, but it's going to cause me a few JavaScript bugs. So this is where you're really going to vet out how you take that ideation process and put it and bring it into reality. And when you reach the end of the prototyping phase, you should be in a position where there's going to be a high level of success for you, budgetary and process, when you're trying to move this into Drupal. So I have an example up here of just a website that, did that not work?
No, you did it again.
Okay.
Blast you.
Is a great example of it's breaking convention in a small way, but this museum has gone ahead and created a new sort of experience with viewing the image gallery on their website. They wanted you as a user to feel like you were really at the museum itself, to give you that experience of having a tour guide there with you. So they could have gone in and taken an existing module from a retail shop or an online store and just made a hover that zooms in on everything. But they want to expand their brand and present themselves as an authority on these objects here. So rather than having the regular, just standard hover effect, they're giving you a tooltip at the very beginning to say, hey, click on these little boxes on the right-hand side, and we're going to show you the important pieces of this sculpture that you will want to look at. So we see the little bubble on the right-hand side, and as you click on them, it's going to zoom in to specific areas on the statue. So this is an example of a company that clearly could have gone with the easy solution, something that already exists, that's driven by the CMS, where you start in the browser and the developer says, hey, we already have the solution. And they step back and said, no, we want you to have the experience of being in a museum, of having a tour guide, of having access to our knowledge base as an authority on this type of artwork. And really, this is what each business goal or each project should be stepping through in order to identify their business goals on every single project. So, prototyping itself is a phase that is fairly new to web development. It was kind of born and necessitated through responsive web development, which I think is another reason why a lot of us are here. How can these processes help us with responsive web development in the Drupal environment? Another one that's been recently introduced is front-end development. So, front-end developers, who here is a front-end developer? And a designer? Okay. You should have all kept your hand up. Who is a front-end developer and a designer? All right. You are in charge of applying the basic designs that your UX designer has provided you from the very beginning, but largely you're only going to get core pages. So you are a designer, but you just have a different toolkit. If you're a front-end developer, odds are you have a little bit of neuroses over pixel perfection the way that I do. No, he's shaking his head. No, I don't. You should. It elevates the quality, and it's great to have a front-end developer and a developer as a team again in this phase. You're communicating in different languages, but you're still building a singular environment. Now, it tends to get a little intense when you get into the front-end development phase, because you've gone through ideation, you've gone through prototyping. At this point, the developer has given you your features and your modules, and you're probably waist high in budgets. But you still need to have that relationship and that dedication to success for the project where you can identify the goals. And your front-end developer is going to ask you to do some crazy things sometimes. And it's hard to get a yes, but...
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Try to get it discreetly.
Yeah, so your front-end developer and your developer are both doing the work here. But you need to have the courage and the open communication to go to your developer and say, I need this. I need you to put in the time. I need you to give me this solution so that I can take it onto the front end of the website to create this interaction. The importance is there for the refinement and the polish of the project to communicate the brand and the entire user experience.
Yeah, and this is the first time, a lot of times we talk about, we're always looking for when's the handoff occur. And I hope we've been clear that the handoff with the relationship of developer and designer has been from the very beginning. But this is the one time they're both working really intensely on the exact same asset, and really working in a close relationship of this give and take to collaboration to teaming up on solutions, everything. And so wireframing, the assets are in the design space, and prototyping, the assets are in the design space while the developer is working with features. But this is the one time everyone's in the same party. So it's a really good time to have that investment as a company in design so that the budget's there. You've funded this process that's going to be expensive. It's going to be really help elevate the final product. And
get to know your developer. Learn how to talk to them, how to get a yes, when to ask for things and when not to ask for things. I work closely with my director of development, and I know when I need something, if I hear this really high-pitched giggle coming out of his cubicle, I can bring a cute little dog over and look through and be like, hey, Ethan, can you build this for me, maybe? I know it's a little late. I know that we decided we were going to go in one direction, but could we maybe explore this? Try to just maintain that open line of communication throughout the whole process, and I think that you'll find that it really allows you to develop more creative solutions.
Yeah. And so this is just the final quote I took from the packaging, but I think it really summarizes everything so well, and it just happens to be from Steve Jobs, which is just an excellent add-on. But what we're creating through design in these websites is really complicated. It's really layered, and there is simply no individual or one-size-fits-all solution. It is a constant process of collaboration with this massive team as you dissect layers from this macro concept, these broad sketches, all the way down to testing on a vertical tablet of this one feature. So it's really, there is no, this is the point where the developer jumps in. It's much more holistic than that from the very beginning. So I hope that made a little sense there from our perspective, so to speak. And that's it. Thank you very much. Any questions? And I was told that we have some mics in the middle areas here if you wanted to mic yourself. Perfect.
So I don't work for a design agency or a web shop. I work for a university, but we very often partner with design agencies for projects. And how, sort of like from the other side of the conversation, how do you folks feel when you come up with these beautiful designs that are wonderful and capturing our brand and all that, and then you have folks like me saying, yeah, but we can't do that because of these university politics, or we can't do that because of our existing system, and all these other constraints?
Yeah, in general, I mean, that's one of the roles of a designer, especially from the creative art director standpoint, is to make sure that you have dealt with a whole variety of issues. We do a lot of travel websites which have really significant complexities from you're trying to market a destination, but there's chamber members, and so you deal with a whole slew of different issues. So it is one of those, designers can't just be focusing on your brand, for example. They got to be focusing on your business challenges, and so it's important to get those challenges from you during those initial discussions, and it's absolutely important to see those implemented in those drawings and those initial sketches. So when you're reviewing those, they say, and here's how I can address, building something that's more sustainable for, different needs of the university or whatever the case may be. in addition to communicating how easy it is to find classes or whatever, So it should be a part of the process, and it should be expected to be a part of the process. And if you encounter that, it's simply a missed opportunity in those kickoff phases.
Great, thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
I guess I have a question. I work in a very small Drupal shop, 2 developers and me, kind of a unicorn.
Yeah.
And,
We'll talk after this.
We've taken on a client that previously had developers that started the project and did a great job. He's a very wonderful client because he's very knowledgeable. They have wireframes. He has the whole thing, the whole branding like in his head. But they went ahead without a designer. So now it's come down to those horrible little questions from the wonderful client. The font size on this is, could you change that down a point? And it's like, well, it's going to affect other things. How can we really let this person know that even though it's late in the game, the site has not launched yet, and he really, really needs a designer, or I feel his business goals will just totally fail.
So a couple ways to approach something along those lines. I think number one is, if you're at the phase to be looking at type styles, for example, it's important to gather that feedback and be like, yeah, okay, we're gonna, listen and get that feedback. But you might be, but you.
We're building already. The site was a third of the way built when we got it.
Is it a responsive site? Just out of
It is now.
retroactive responsive, my favorite project.
Yes.
In general, you have to take the authoritative position with readability. Gone are the days. It was a wonderful trick back in the days of print of being able to make type smaller. The smaller it got, the higher end it got. It was kind of a strange formula. Completely unusable and very impractical on the web, especially with responsive web. And so, it kind of comes down to a level of trust that the client has in you. If you say the readability is there across the devices, if you say the readability is there for the whole ecosystem, that this site can be pulled up on and viewed by the audience and that they're appealing to, then that's one of those things that they essentially should be able to buy off on from the trust perspective. And then, of course, the caveat to that is sometimes that just doesn't matter. I did a responsive architectural website for a client, and it was this really crazy responsive website. And this is a huge architect in Aspen, Colorado. He does things all over the world. But his monitor, you're planning this massive responsive, on a projection where you can show the client wonderful things about your design, on the tablets that you have on site and the phones. And then you walk into the owner of the architect shop, and he's got that free Dell monitor that comes with your computer. Perfect square, which is really weird. And it's like a 15-inch, So you have to also, especially when you get into responsive design, you have to make some pretty significant decisions and compromises. But readability is still obviously your core concern. And sometimes that just means the code that can scale the topography better if it does get too small. If the client can bring up reasonable places where it is too small. But in general, from your perspective as an authority, saying, yeah, no, it's the standard size or slightly above the size or whatever the case may be for readability across these devices.
I think it's mostly that he's seeing it on his monitor, like you said.
Yeah.
But the real issue is he's crying and not understanding why he needs to spend money on a designer when he's got these wonderful wireframes, the site is underway being built. Can't we just change this font size? And moving along, and he's not understanding how those font size changes other things too. We'll just load money, like out the window for
Well, it sounds like you might be at that phase where you're entering that you have a defined scope. And obviously in responsive, that's a dangerous game to get into. Typically, we'll do sprint models with responsive web design. We work an hour, you pay an hour, without question. Even if we built something that was buggy. because responsive web design is a give and take and a constant flow. Where you go through best practices, you go from macro to micro, and when you get to that phase down the process, you have in this sprint near the end of the project, right? You're near the end. You want to go live. You even have a dot on the calendar, and and then the client says, "Well, I think the type might be too small," and you say, "Okay, well here's where we're at." You can either spend a couple hours for us to increase the type size, adjust the places where it caused impacts down the road. Or you can have us test maybe a conversion funnel further for different types of devices or something along those lines. Now you might be past that situation. You might be in a situation where that's simply not a relationship way you can't take the relationship that direction. But that's kind of on the future standpoint. And so from that standpoint, when we were doing scoped responsive web design, we ate it. We did it because it's our brand at the end of the day. I think a lot of companies in this room most likely paid a dear price getting into the responsive space, and that's probably one of them, of the days of defined scopes and responsive web will cause that exact situation where you're like, this is free. I can't ask my developer to spend 5 hours to do something and eat it. But that's kind of where you've ended up because it's your brand, it's your deliverable. And that's the agency perspective in many regards. If you want to think about it, web shops like to just stop when they're done. They like to be like, we told you it was 10 hours, we're at 10.01, we cannot do any more. Where agencies try to estimate it the best they can, and they would do it until it was right. And of course, the middle ground is this sprint model where you buy chunks and you keep saying, do you want to go further? You're going to run a retainer or something along those lines. And maybe you can convince the client to be in that situation. Let's move this. This isn't a deal breaker. The readability is there, from my professional opinion. I know you think it's a little small. Let's move forward. Let's get the site live, and then let's take some budget in 3 months. Because websites, we've got to stop with the process that websites are just projects that are done, of course, right? So try to get the client on the thought process. This is something you're going to be maintaining and nurturing in years to come. And the next quarter's budget, let's spend some time on topography.
I would,
I will.
We'll
I haven't done it yet, but I'll put them up on our blog, and I will even. I'll probably make a PDF or something. I don't know. Maybe put them on some sort of slide share system for the conference to distribute. So keep an eye on the Design for Drupal site.
I also wanted to say that, similar to what Tom was saying about preparing them for some of that expenditure down the road, I would start emphasizing the quality of it now, and the idea that however many months or weeks post-launch. Sometimes I'll say, we'll take a look at your analytics and see where your user challenges are coming in and see how we can refine it after we get it out into the internet, into the web.
Sure. Any other questions? I guess we can run a little late since I think this is the last one, right? Before we all start mingling, networking.
Yeah, I was just wondering how you guys handle budgets or estimates. You said you work hourly, but
right.
People need to know roughly what you're going to spend.
Right, it could be a hell of a session just going into that. So obviously, we went through the whole progression. We said, yes, we want to get into responsive web. How much do you think it'll add? I don't know. The percentages, and we tried to estimate it, and we got burned. And then we tried to overestimate it in the next project where it was just included, and we got burned. And things kind of dovetail together. We are a pretty savvy Drupal shop. We do a lot of best practices in the Drupal space that have been a significant investment of our time. And they really helped us establish much more of a process of working in these sprints. So long story short, if a client comes to us and says, I need a website that allows people to book vacation rentals in Martha's Vineyard, right? We can do some further discussions, and we get to a point where I will literally say it's going to be $100,000 to $150,000. And you can start to talk, you start to create that conversation of we're going to go through this whole ideation, creative process. You start to build trust with the client so they understand that you're not just going to go crazy, But the biggest thing that we do is we say everything your website does now, forget it. You cannot develop responsive website design with essentially the junk in their existing website. It's the kitchen sink. It's the websites from, clients have had websites for however many years, right? They're like a room or a house that keeps getting things added to it. And the whole principles of responsive website design from mobile first standpoint to just performance to what users actually want is very focused. And so you start the project from the ground up and you say it's going to be approximately 100 to 150. We're going to do, let's plan on doing 4 $30,000 sprints, for example. And you start to identify what those objectives of each one, which are the prioritized features that you're going to be building, how you're going to be going through the prototyping phase, and you start burning up budget and buying additional sprints. And the client is going to either run out of budget, features, or time. But I just don't know how you're going to be able to say it's going to be $125,000, because you're never going to be able to, at any time in that project, have everything specified. Why spend $20,000 of time specifying a website as opposed to just doing it? You know what I'm saying? So we did that phase too. I developed absurd PDFs that were, because we thought after we got burned early on in responsive design, of course, I'll just solve the problem by specifying every single thing I can. So that, $30,000 later, I still missed 50% of the things that came down the road. It's just impossible. So you have to take the clients on that journey, and that kind of relates to the marketing platform aspect of a website versus a final deliverable. We're going to go on this journey. We expect it to be approximately this much. This works within your budget, your marketing budget that you've put aside, and it's going to solve your core business needs. Is it going to solve your periphery business needs? Is it going to solve some additional bells and whistles, if you will, of your website? Maybe, maybe not. But it will solve your core needs. I just don't know how far beyond it will based on the budget. So I hope that helps, but just a little preview.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely, the direction that I keep looking. Part of it's just, I think, so we're I guess maybe what you guys used to be is just a core, Drupal development shop. And I think, a lot of your points about the fact that it's, it's harder to sell a lot of this stuff, I think, as a Drupal shop, because you don't have, you're not bringing the vision, you're not bringing sort of selling the business marketing, goals as much as you could be. You're implementing the technical approach.
Right.
And I guess, trying to convince people to say, okay, we'll go with a rough, $100,000 to $150,000 budget on something that doesn't, there isn't a huge vision behind it. I think
Right. Agencies can make that connection to close deals, so to speak, whereas web shops struggle.
We're facing a lot of upgrades in Drupal 5 that people want to upgrade from 5, but their Drupal statistics is 7, and I anticipate 7 to 8.
Yeah.
And they're just looking to upgrade the technology. And we want to be able to provide a responsive website because it's 2014. But what you just said, touched on, it really makes sense, is that unless they're willing to deconstruct their website and start thinking of it in new terms, in a new frame of mind, then it really is pretty difficult for us to take that Drupal 5 site and turn it into a Drupal 7 responsive site.
Like, we just had an aha moment where we're like, oh, we have clients the clients that are most frustrating for us are the clients who are like, no, we like the website the way it is, even though we look at it as experts and we're like, oh my god. And we're like, well, maybe we can convince them to make it a little better while we do this design refresh and upgrading. And really, they're not bought in. And I mean, we also work with the clients on tight budgets, so that's another issue. That's a separate issue. But yeah, maybe we should just follow these clients.
Well,
we recently attempted to move a D6 website over to D7, and change it from just a static site into responsive. And what we actually found was that we burned more time trying to update those content types to work within the responsive framework than we would. It would have been so much quicker and more streamlined if we had just scrapped the old site and started fresh.
Responsive web design is not a big website that shrinks down to a small website. That is not what responsive web design is. And that's probably the core purpose. You don't want to look at a responsive website as, okay, we have a desktop site with all these bells and whistles, and we're going to do some CSS magic, and it's going to fit nicely. So that's where you get in trouble. So the best thing is to get clients to buy in. So budget limitations are a huge challenge. There are other ways to develop optimized experiences without being responsive. And usually because responsive is expensive. It just is. It's an extremely expensive endeavor. So generally speaking, the mobile-first philosophy really helps hammer that home with clients. Prototyping really helps hammer it home further. So you get the client the client has to trust you. If they trust you at a higher level, they'll trust 100 to 150 will get me there. Then you start with this mobile-first concept. They see a blank sheet of paper and only 3 buttons on their mobile interface. So now they're buying into the fact that they signed a document that said, everything your old site does, forget about it. We're starting from scratch. We're understanding your business from scratch. And then you dive into this process where, prototyping, the client starts to work with the website. And I don't know if that was clear, but prototyping isn't necessarily just statics. It can be you could be working in Bootstrap or Foundation or whatever the case is and really creating interactions that the client uses. And they're going to have aha moments during that phase. They're going to be trying to navigate their website on their phone, and they're going to be like, oh, yeah, the kitchen sink wasn't going to work here anyway, because that's the beauty of interaction development versus what do you think of this color? What do you think of this texture? And so it is a process, but I think a lot of shops continue to just simply say, yeah, we'll just make it responsive. And you just get in a serious rabbit hole.
I mean, the second you go from just a desktop site to responsive, you should know as a designer that whole information architecture needs to be reworked. It's not just page-to-page information architecture, you're looking at page-to-page from mobile to tablet to desktop resolution.
A lot of the things that have come up will really come back to education. And that's where I think I think that's actually the biggest gap in how a designer is used to working versus how a web shop maybe used to working. Right. And whereas I think designers are more often forced, or at least should be, to be able to explain the why behind the solution that they're presenting, and that's the thing that builds the trust, and it would address things with typography, it would address things with workflow and how things will evolve over time, and getting used to budgets that are in cycles to get you further along rather than...
There's a huge client education component to everything. Every client is asking, well, how much is the website going to cost? And I don't give them that answer, and it drives them crazy. We lose deals left and right, but I cannot sign off on a number. And so it is an educational process, but that also aligns clients with how we work. We get clients who work the way we do. They commit to more of a digital marketing approach versus a website approach. Again, kind of that you don't sell a website. You're selling something that it might look like this in 2014, it might add this in 2015, it might do this, and you got a roadmap now versus, otherwise you find yourself caught in the situation of the clients digging through their old site and, oh, you forgot about this. What did I forget about? Oh, this ability to blah, 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 and your developer's like, oh my God, So, so just kind of having this initial buy-off and trust in education, you're right, it's a huge communication thing, and usually that means the sales processes get much longer, and then the people who come back to close the deal are the ones who are like, yeah, I get it now, let's do it. Anything else? Well, thank you.